You're listening to Season 2 of DB Honeybutter, featuring LGBTQ plus people who've overcome adversity, are changing the way we think, or are finding their truth. Today I have the honor to speak with gay pastor Reverend Steve Pieters, one of the original AIDS survivors, activist, therapist, and most recently, celebrity, famous for his groundbreaking 1985 interview with Tammy Faye Baker that inspired Jessica Chastain to take the role in the Eyes of Tammy Faye. We talk about Steve's long and inspiring journey through AIDS, spirituality, gay culture, the power of hope, and how his fairy wand ended up in the Smithsonian. I am so honored and excited to welcome Reverend Steve Pieters to DB Honeybutter today. It's so exciting to meet you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. Wonderful to meet you.
Thank you. I was going to introduce you as something, and I realized, as you must be realizing lately, you have so many descriptives. I don't even know all the things to say. I was going to say, because you're noticed the gay pastor who's been living with AIDS since 1992. You're an activist, you're a pastor, you're a survivor, you're a therapist, you're a miracle, depending on how you think of it. And you're a hero and you're an icon. And I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, how do you describe yourself now at this point?
Golly, a human being. I am absolutely over the top about being 69 years old. I mean, I wasn't supposed to see 33, so 69 feels pretty good. And I'm delighted that I've lived this long, and I certainly don't think of myself as a hero, I just put one foot in front of the other and do what I seem to be called to do.
Yeah. There, I guess you have so many stories to tell. I guess that's why there's so much attention now because of. We'll talk about the elephant in the room. If the elephant in the room, she had a lot of makeup and a wig on.
A lot of eyelashes.
And a lot of eyelashes would be Tammy Faye. And as a gay man, I love Tammy Faye. I was a little kid watching Tammy Faye and Shared. I had no idea the difference between the two. But
that's the first time I've ever heard those two put together.
I was watching PTL Club before. I didn't even know it was religious at all. I just thought it was the Tammy Faye show. Yeah. But let's talk about that because you're getting a lot of attention right now because of a very, very famous interview you did in 1985. It was pretty groundbreaking at the time and extremely moving. I've watched it a couple of times to get ready for today. I was very, very moved by it.
Well, thank you. Yeah. It was an amazing time in terms of the fear that surrounded having AIDS. I mean, the people were scared of me, and I was going to be flown. They were going to fly me to Charlotte, North Carolina to do the interview in person, but they decided that, the Heritage Village staff there might not treat me so well, and the camera crew might be afraid to come in the same room as I was. So they did it by remote.
They did, yeah.
The first ever satellite hookup on the PTL network.
Wow. Because she even talks about her headpiece. She wasn't used to her earpiece.
Yeah, well, I wasn't either.
She think it was caught on her earring. I think.
I know. I wish I'd had an earring to hook mine on.
So yeah. I was very surprised at this. Since I wanted to ask you. Well, let's ask you this. What did you think was going to happen when you went into that interview?
Well, I looked at it as an opportunity to reach an audience that I would never otherwise reach with the message of God's love for all people, including LGBT plus people and people with HIV and AIDS, although we didn't call it HIV back then. It was AIDS or ARC, AIDS-related complex, or GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency, which is how I was first diagnosed in '82. Yeah, so there was a lot of fear about it, and I thought, there's no better way to dispel the fear than to put a human face on the disease. And I'd done a lot of interviews about being a gay man with AIDS, and just never in front of a televangelist on the largest televangelist network in the world. It was a chance to reach millions I would never otherwise reach. So
Yeah. Did you get a chance to speak to her before, or was that pretty much
just for about 3 minutes right before the interview started? And she came on, and I heard her in my earpiece, and I went, "Oh my God, that's Tammy Faye Bakker!" and 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 she was so sweet and supportive, and couldn't have been more loving and kind. And she bent over backwards to say thank you over and over again for my courage and facing the, being in the lion's den of televangelism. But she was, and I had a feeling she would be very supportive. And she also told me in the minutes before the interview began, she said, "Now this is the Phil Donahue show of PTL. We talk about issues like Phil Donahue does. We don't talk about Jesus. We talk about issues." And so I said, "Oh, okay." And then 3 minutes into the interview, she started talking about Jesus, and I thought, okay. Let's look for the goose.
Tammy Faye. Well, it's funny because for Donahue, it was called Tammy Faye's House Party, that segment, right? Which is funny. I think I was surprised at the sincerity of that she brought to that interview. And it almost seemed, in some ways, the questions she was asking you, I felt like she was almost setting you up to question the questions. It was like she was almost helping you to support, like she was helping you support the answers.
Right. Well, that's an interesting observation. I've shown the video so many times over the years, but when it was on video cassette, I would take it around to all the different speaking engagements I had. They always wanted to see that. People often said, those were such silly questions. And some would even say they were stupid questions. But I would argue, no, absolutely not. They were the right questions for her audience. And while I'd never been asked quite so bluntly about, if I'd ever had sex with a woman, or, if I'd given women a fair try, or what made I think there was no hope for being straight, I still, I was flabbergasted at a couple moments in the interview, but I found my tongue, and I was able to answer to, respecting the fact that these were the right questions for her audience.
And because of the way she didn't sort of press back, she kind of went along. I almost felt like she was just checking that off for those people to hear. It was a long interview. Also, it was very detailed. You covered gay adoption. You covered, being closeted as would you still marry a woman anyway? Like, she really asked a long series of questions.
It was a 24-minute interview altogether, which you can now see on YouTube. It's there for the viewing, and the first half of the interview, she talked about being gay. And there are some who have said that she was working out issues in her own marriage around the questions that she was asking me.
Interesting.
And I don't know that that's true, but it kind of makes sense given the fact that it was revealed later that Jim Bakker had homosexual liaisons occasionally, and so that was part of the scandal that brought them down in '87, not quite 2 years after I did the interview.
Wow, yeah, was that? I didn't realize it was that short of a time after. That's interesting. Yeah.
Well, and have you seen the movie, the Jessica?
I have not seen it yet. I'm seeing it tomorrow.
Okay. Yeah. Well, there's this scene. In the scene where she interviews me, or me as portrayed by Randy Havens of TV Stranger Things. Anyway, she's asking me all these questions about being gay and having AIDS, and in the movie, Jerry Falwell is sitting backstage with Jim Bakker listening, and he loses it. He just loses control and said, "That's it. It's got to stop. She's got to be brought down." So it's a big turning point in the film.
Yeah.
But
wow, yeah,
it's not 24 minutes worth. It's only like 3. Maybe.
Yeah. What happened after that interview for you? Did that change how people saw you? Did it elevate you to some spokesperson? And did you want to be?
Not right away. in 1987, about the time that Jim and Tammy were brought down by Jerry Falwell and his band of televangelists, he Troy Perry, the founder and moderator of the Metropolitan Community Churches, the denomination I serve, showed the video of the Tammy Baker interview at the opening session of the international conference of MCC churches from all over the world. And there were like 1,000 delegates in the room. And he showed the video, and I sat there and squirmed because I still thought I had done a terrible job. And oh my God, I told my neighbor the day after the interview, I'm so glad no one I know will ever see it. That didn't happen, but
and here we are talking about it so many years later.
Yeah. And so anyway, Troy showed the video, and people stood up and cheered, and that was the first moment I really realized that there was something happening in the video that, you know, was unusual and groundbreaking. And I began to get invitations to speak, not only because of the Tammy Faye interview, but because I had recovered from full-blown AIDS and from one of the most toxic drug trials there was, the Surman trial. So I recovered, and so I was in great demand to come and bring hope and share my testimony and show the Tammy Baker interview everywhere I went. Right. It really kind of put me on the map, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Did you ever speak with her again after that time?
We exchanged greetings through a mutual friend, Mel White. But that was about it. You know, she said at the end of the interview, "You got our number now, and you know, you call anytime and everything." Well, she gave me the prayer line at PTL. So, you know, it wasn't her number. So, no, I never did get to meet her. You know, I was very regretful. I am regretful of that. I wish I had the opportunity. I am, however, great friends with her son, Jay Baker. Okay. And over the last couple of years, we've become very close. And I've even become friends with Tammy Sue Baker, their daughter.
Yeah. Wow, that's really nice that you still have that connection to them.
Yeah. It's important to them too. I mean, Jay has leaned over backwards to tell me how important, how much my interview changed the family. That when he was 10 in 1985 when the interview happened, and Tammy Sue was, I believe, 15. And after that interview, Tammy decided she had a ministry to the gay and lesbian community, and she started taking Tammy Sue and Jay to MCCs, to gay-friendly churches, to pride parades, and she also took them to AIDS hospices and hospitals to visit people with AIDS. And Jay said it really opened his eyes to a lot of things and gave him great comfort even then when he was 10, because he knew he was different somehow. He's not gay, but he grew up to be kind of a punk rocker and tattooed and ears and all that. And
different generation, right?
Yeah.
There's been so much advancement now in HIV treatment and AIDS, and I think younger people now they have PrEP and they sort of take a little bit of it for granted, if just for lack of perspective. I think there's a lot of information in the world right now, but not a lot of perspective. And I think sharing stories and speaking in person is what sort of makes that gap come together. And so
absolutely, yeah.
I would love if you could just share your initial diagnosis. Was it even diagnosable when you were?
Well, it was very interesting because the early on, I was diagnosed 8 months after the first report of AIDS. What came to be known as AIDS. And I developed candidiasis or thrush. And they didn't quite know why a young man, not even 30 yet, had developed this. And but they said it means you've got some kind of virus on board. Boy, did I ever. But then, they were able to measure the immune system back then, and they saw that I was a gay man, obviously, and with my very low counts on my immune system, they diagnosed me with GRID, gay-related immunodeficiency. That's what they were calling AIDS back then. Mm-hmm. And then in 82 and 83, I got very sick with hepatitis, cytomegalovirus, CMV, pneumonia, viral infections, mononucleosis, herpes, shingles, strep throat, a variety of fungal infections. I mean, I got sick with everything. And throughout 83, they had changed the GRID to ARC, AIDS-related complex. And AIDS was defined by you had to have one or more of 5 specific diseases. And I didn't have any of those 5 specific diseases as of yet. But they knew that I was likely to come. I mean, they didn't know enough to know whether everybody who had GRID and ARC were going to develop AIDS, but they assumed that I was, because I was so very sick. And in April of 84, I was diagnosed with Kaposi sarcoma, which gave me my diagnosis of full-blown AIDS, as well as stage 4 lymphoma. And I was given 8 months to live. I was told I wouldn't live to see 1985. Everybody died from AIDS back then. And there was so much fear, because when I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS, with Kaposi sarcoma and lymphoma, they didn't even have the virus yet. They hadn't discovered the virus yet. So people have asked me, well, when did you first test positive? Well, I didn't test positive until long after I was diagnosed with full-blown AIDS, because they hadn't found the virus and they didn't develop the test for it, or for the antibodies, until sometime after I was diagnosed. One of the things that young people have to understand is, they didn't know whether you could get it from being in the same room, breathing the same air, touching the things that I had touched. And I was a walking symbol of everything that gay men were most afraid of at the time. So I was abandoned by all the gay men in my life. And if it hadn't been for a group of lesbians who took care of me, women, members of the women's MCC, De Colores MCC, and Lucia Chappelle specifically, my neighbor, who took care of me and kept me company and brought me groceries. And if it hadn't been for them, I probably would have shriveled up and died,
Wow, that's interesting. I don't think a lot of people know that that was a part of the experience then.
When I was housebound with all of those illnesses that I listed in 83, I tried to find somebody to bring me communion. Mm-hmm. And I could not find anybody to bring me communion. I mean, as a clergyman, particularly as a Christian, communion is the visible sign of your inclusion in the community. And so for months, I couldn't take communion. And finally, a deacon at the church, a wonderful lesbian named Jerry, she decided that she was going to bring me communion. Well, she was obviously terrified when she arrived at my house, and she didn't touch anything, and she, kept her distance from me. And she consecrated the elements, but she had me serve myself. She didn't even want to place it on my tongue. But you could tell she was really scared, and for good reason. They didn't know.
Yeah, they didn't know. I want to ask you about your spiritual side, plays into your gay life and also being ill. Is this something that kind of got you through it, or did you question? Did it ever make you question your
all of that? Yes, and yes. I grew up in a religious household. My grandparents were missionaries in Korea, and my uncle was a rather well-known Presbyterian pastor, and my parents were very involved, went to Sunday school every Sunday, and a good Protestant church in New England. And then I grew up and I wanted to be a song and dance man on Broadway. But God had other plans in mind for me, and I realized that I wanted to be a minister. when I was about 26, 27, and I went to seminary and became a minister and became the pastor of the Metropolitan Community Church of Hartford, Connecticut. And that's where I started to get sick. And I moved to Los Angeles in 82 after resigning the pulpit there. And at first, when I was so sick in the 83 with GRID and ARC, I really did question my faith. And I, was angry at God. And at the same time, I felt like God was informing me, and I certainly prayed a lot, but I felt like God, there was a moment in 83 when I was like crawling to the bathroom. I was so sick. And I suddenly had this flash of clarity that I was going to get well and write about this. And it was as if God was telling me to take notes on what it's like to be sick with AIDS in the early 80s. And I did. I took notes. I started writing. And I wrote articles. Anyway, when I was diagnosed as terminal, it was 2 weeks before Easter, and the pastor of the church where I was associate pastor invited me to preach the Easter sermon. And that was the most valuable gift anybody could have given me, because it made me look at what it meant to believe in the Easter message as a man who was facing death, a certain death from a horribly stigmatized, awful disease. People dying of AIDS, they were ugly deaths. I mean, it was hard. It was really hard. But what I discovered was they told me the worst thing they could possibly tell me. Mm-hmm. And because I knew that God was greater than the death of Jesus on the cross, I knew that God was greater than AIDS. And I said that in my sermon, and the whole congregation went, oh, like, how could you say, oh, of course, and they put it on buttons and sprawled it across the church and all of that. Anyway, so, and the other thing I discovered was that in spite of the fact that they told me I was going to die horribly, I discovered that I could still laugh, I could still sing, I could still enjoy my friends, and I could still dance. And right then and there, that Easter, I did a little shuffle off the buffalo across the pulpit, across the altar area, and the audience, the congregation. I'm still a Broadway. The congregation applauded like crazy and loved it, but it became my task, my mission to promote hope in the face of all the hopelessness there was about AIDS back then.
Yeah, thank you. I know that you were on a experimental medication,
right?
It killed some people, didn't it? Like it was toxic. Yeah, it killed people. What was that like, getting on that and off that? And then when the cocktails really did finally come along, what was that transition like? How did your body begin to heal?
Well, long before the cocktails, 1985, the cocktails became available in 1996, 97. And so in 1985, when I defied the odds and had lived to see 1985, my doctor, who was the principal researcher on the first antiviral drug trial tried against HIV, a drug called Suramin. And she invited me to be patient number one on the drug. And so after much hemming and hawing and thinking and praying, I decided to go ahead and do it. And within 6 weeks, my KS lesions had disappeared and my lymphoma was in complete remission. And, I wanted to shout it from the rooftops, but Dr. Levine wisely told me, this is my news to tell, and we have to see if it happens for other people as well. And it's a good thing she did, because it was extremely toxic. It killed a number of people who took the drug, and the rest of all the people who took Suramin died from the progression of HIV and AIDS within a year or two. I'm one of only 2 survivors, and the other survivor dropped off the trial after only 4 weeks. I took it for a total of 39 weeks, and it very nearly killed me. blew out my adrenal glands. It caused me to go blind, legally blind. And I was paralyzed on the left side of my major neuromuscular damage. I wasted away to nothing but a skeleton. Fortunately, when they got me off the drug, after about 6 months, I began to get better. And by 1987, I was clinically well in all respects.
Wow.
And I stayed that way for 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. That's amazing. As far as the gay culture, the acceptance of AIDS, like you've also seen it, you've seen it be so much, you've seen it go from so much fear to right to a certain amount of acceptance. Some celebrities became ill and it kind of pushed it into culture, right? And then you had some celebrities like Elizabeth Taylor come forward and, and sort of speak up. Thank God for Elizabeth Taylor for so many reasons. And I wanted to ask you about that era when it's kind of shifted from fear into the culture with a little more acceptance. Like, what was your involvement in that part? And did you meet Elizabeth Taylor?
I did indeed. Yes. I mean, she was quite the AIDS activist and she was quite amazing. And AIDS was her passion. When her best friend, Rock Hudson, died of AIDS, well, he got sick and then died. She was there and she rallied the entertainment industry, the film industry in Hollywood to come together for the first ever entertainment industry fundraiser against AIDS. It was called Commitment to Life. And it actually happened like 2 months before the Tammy Faye Baker interview. And I was in the midst of doing the serum trials. I was quite thin and a little bit wasted. And they invited me. I was on the board of APLA. I was AIDS Project Los Angeles. I was the client representative on the board. And they invited me to speak at the Commitment to Life event. And so that's when I first met Elizabeth, and Shirley MacLaine introduced me to the audience, and she was just amazing. And I mean, it was an amazing evening. 250 major celebrities, along with 1,500 other people in the ballroom at the Bonaventure Hotel downtown LA. It was quite an amazing evening. And I did the same thing I did in the pulpit. I said, look, they told me the worst thing they could possibly tell me, and I can still dance. And right there in front of Elizabeth and Shirley and all the rest of them, I shuffled off to Buffalo and everybody cheered. So.
That's amazing. It must have been quite something to have it be such a fearful, people wouldn't even say the word. They were so afraid of it, right? To go from that to be at a fundraiser for it, to speaking about it, or to even be openly just to say that you had it and sort of be any kind. It must have been a very interesting sort of shift in how you thought about it and thought about yourself, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I had been doing interviews about being a gay man with AIDS for the AIDS Project Los Angeles and for MCC for quite some time by that point. So I was accustomed to speaking in public about it. And I was one of the only openly gay people with openly having AIDS, living with AIDS, in terms of being on the media level. And so back then, I was one of very few spokesmen. When Rock Hudson got sick, they had the first ever AIDS walk in Los Angeles. And when he announced his illness, it was just before the walk, and fundraising at the walk took off. I mean, we were expecting to make, I was on the board of APLA, I think I said already, and we were expecting to make $700,000 maybe, and it made millions. I don't remember the exact figures, but because of Rock Hudson's announcement, it was off the charts. And then at that first Commitment to Life event where I spoke in front of Hollywood, Rock Hudson was about 2 weeks away from death. And Burt Lancaster read a letter from him because there was a lot of controversy about his having kissed Linda Evans on the series Dynasty. And she got up and spoke and said that she wasn't afraid that she was going to get AIDS, and she wished Rock all the best. And then 2 weeks later, I think it was, he died. And that did change everything. I mean, Rock Hudson's the announcement and subsequent death really did change everything, in terms of the visibility and the acceptance of the fact that it was an important issue.
Yeah, yeah. I know there was a lot of shame there's a lot of shame that goes along with gay culture to begin with, unfortunately. And it doesn't sound like you had a lot of shame about being gay. From what I've read, you were open in seminary. Like
I was.
Yeah. I mean, that was not an ordinary or easy thing to do.
I was the only openly gay student there. I wasn't the only gay student there. I was the openly gay student there. And
like the mid 1975 is what I had written down. Does that sound right? Like that
came out in 1975. I started in seminary in 77.
Okay, yeah.
Young people, I mean, we're talking about generations here, right?
Yeah.
Young people think, have remarked to me and others, oh, it must have been so hard to be gay in the 70s. Oh my God, and all that. And I went, no, we had a blast. I mean, it was before AIDS. We could do anything, and we did. I mean, it was a wildly fun time, and we were galvanized. The LGBT community was galvanized around the fight against Anita Bryant and her cronies, who were trying to take away our rights when they had just been granted. Harvey Milk was leading us and was an incredibly charismatic, exciting leader nationally, not just in San Francisco. And it was an incredible time to be gay.
Yeah. Yeah. Is it true that you came out to your parents watching Anita Bryant?
Oh, well, what happened was that Anita Bryant was on Phil Donahue, speaking of Donahue, one morning that I was visiting my parents, and I had not been out to them, and she kept talking about it and being hateful, and I was going, oh, that woman, oh God, she's so hateful, oh my God, I hate, everything, but oh my God, I'm gay, Mom and Dad, So that night at dinner, my dad asked me, do you think you might be a homosexual? And I kind of laughed and said, yeah. And I was already in seminary at that point, and I knew I was going to have to tell them at some point because I was studying for the ministry in MCC. And that's when I came out to my parents, and my dad reached across the table and held my hand and said, I love you, and nothing can change that.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. You have a lot of contact with people as a spokesperson in different ways, and as a pastor. What do you find is happening in the gay community now, as far as like need for communication, or places where there's hope, or there's less hope, or that we need work, or what is your take, seeing so many different kinds of people and talking to so many people? What's going on in the gay community right now, do you think?
Well, I'm of an older generation, but I certainly know a lot of younger gay men from being in the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles.
Mm-hmm.
And the Gay Men's Chorus of Los Angeles has a lot of young gay men in it. And there is a general lack of knowledge about what it was like back then, which is one of the reasons why I keep talking about it. A few years ago, we did a concert about the intersection of sexuality and spirituality, a concert about that. And a number of us in the chorus were asked to share our stories of how we came out and how we dealt with our family's religion and that sort of thing. And I told my story, and young gay men in the chorus came up to me afterwards, because I talked about having AIDS in the 80s, and they said, oh my God, I had no idea it was like that. So, what was it like? And then that started them asking more questions, and I would tell them, look around at your circle of friends here in the chorus and imagine that 2/3 of them get sick and die from the same disease that you have. And they go, and there's like this startling realization of what it was like back then that they hadn't even thought of. I think that there's some complacency that, as long as I take my PrEP pill, I'll be fine. And it's okay if I skip doses because, well, maybe I'm not having sex that week or that day. But, it's really important that you be vigilant with the PrEP and that you continue to use condoms, because there are other diseases out there that can compromise your immune system. But play carefully.
Yeah.
Wear your rubbers.
Do they even know what a rubber is now? That's like I said the other day, and I went right over their heads. Yeah, it's funny. I feel that there's a need. Even though there's the grinder and all that culture we didn't have. We used to have to go out and cruise. That's how we did it, and we were good at it. But we got good at it. Kids just to have their apps and they have all that, and it's a new time. But I think they're missing out on some of the interaction that we had with each other. And I do think they're curious. Like I was looking at Grindr research. I was looking at Grindr, and I noticed like almost in a fetish way that some of the younger ones were really looking to cuddle, like almost they were looking to cuddle as almost like as a fetish. Like we would have said leather once and they want to cuddle. And I thought, wow, the world is really it's really upside down. That's like a need that they're asking for in a sexual setting. Is very interesting,
I think we do need that cuddle. We need to be cuddled, and we need to cuddle. It's really important to our survival to feel loved and to have that touch, that touch of being held.
How has the last couple of years changed us? Do you think that COVID the pandemic has changed what we need, or how we think, or what have you seen?
Well, I've seen, because I isolated, I stayed in my apartment for basically 18 months, and other younger, healthier gay men kept me in groceries and helped me out with trash, taking the trash up to the street and that sort of thing. And, the community of gay men, younger gay men, and the community has been an enormous help to me. And I think that particularly in organizations like a gay chorus, or in, the MCC, certainly, there are so many people who are willing to help, and there are people who need help. Those of us who are older and have had HIV for 40 years, we need help to survive COVID, and I've gotten it, and I'm very, very grateful. And I also know that there are a lot of guys out there that are playing indiscriminately in spite of COVID, in spite of HIV, and I worry. It's a deadly. This is our second plague. It's deadly.
I also think there's a sense that AIDS is over in some sense.
And yet I spoke at a screening of the Eyes of Tammy Faye last night, and by Zoom, and one of the other speakers on the panel said that she had a friend who died of AIDS, just a few years ago. And I had a friend, my best friend, the love of my life, Randy. He died of AIDS a few years back. He didn't believe that the HIV caused AIDS, so he didn't take the drugs, that could save his life. And he regretted it. He apologized before he died. People still die from AIDS.
Yes, they do. In our last few minutes, I want to ask you about the attention that you're getting from Tammy Faye. I know I saw Jessica Chastain. She is a big fan of yours, and I think she held up your photo on one of the talk shows. And I know
on Stephen Colbert, a late show. She
seems like a sweetheart, and I think she always gives you a really big shout out when she's appearing lately. What has it been like?
Well, it's been kind of surreal, to tell you the truth. I mean, to see, first of all, to see somebody play me and say the words I said in a movie is like totally bizarre and wonderful. And I went to the premiere in New York City, and that was the first I'd met Jessica Chastain. And she had told me on a private tweet that she decided to do the movie because of my interview with Tammy Faye.
Wow.
It was that important to her. And she prepped each day, got into character by replaying the interview and talking along with Tammy Faye to get into the accent and the rhythm of her speech and all that. So she had watched my interview with her hundreds of times. And anyway, when we met on the red carpet, I was pointed out to her because I look a little different than I did back then. But she grasped her chest and looked, oh, and then came running over to me on the pink carpet in front of all the paparazzi, grabbed me and threw herself into my arms and just held me for like 30 seconds and 30 seconds and said, "You are extraordinary. Oh my God, it is so extraordinary to meet such a historic person." I mean, she was just like, oh my God, just over the top, I mean, I still eat bran flakes in the morning, I'm a human being. And she treated me like the star, like the celebrity. And so did the other cast members who were there, Vincent D'Onofrio and Cherry Jones. And I mean, it was just an extraordinary evening. And when she pulled out of the hug, when she was hugging me, when the hug ended, she turned to the paparazzi who were right in front of us and said, "Do you know who this is?" And the paparazzi all went, "Yes, Reverend Peters." and I was stunned. But and Vincent D'Onofrio introduced himself to me as if I were the celebrity, like, "Hi, my name is Vincent D'Onofrio, and I wanted to tell you, I saw your interview with Tammy Faye years ago, and I have followed you ever since," and on with the compliments. And I mean, oh my God. And to hear her, I mean, Jessica won't stop talking about me. She, and she's going to record my story for the West Hollywood AIDS Monument, which is not only a physical monument, but an audiovisual archive of stories.
Amazing. That's amazing. That's a great story. And I am going to add myself to the people who are honored to speak to you, because I do think, especially what's been going on in politics in the world in the last few years, I think people who tell the truth are starting to get their just respect. Good. I think there's something really strong about people who tell the truth and who stand up and just are honest. And I'm hoping that's a trend that continues.
I used to feel really guilty about not being the kind of activist who was an act up activist, who was, really angry and threw ashes of dead people with AIDS over the White House fence, and and die-ins and all of this, and I was out there talking hope, and the importance of believing in fairies, and I mean all that kind of stuff, and I used to feel really guilty about it. And I saw a fellow activist in New York when I was visiting there, and she said, and I told her that, and she said, "Stephen, we needed your hope and your believing in fairies and all of that, the tap dancing and everything. We needed that because of all the crap that was going on politically." And so I decided I'm not going to feel guilty about that anymore.
Can you tell us about the fairy wand?
Oh, yeah. Oh, God. I have a fairy wand that I used to carry with me all the time when I did speaking engagements, because in Peter Pan, of course, we learned that fairies die when people don't believe in them. And so you need to believe in fairies and bring them back to life. Well, I always used to say there are a lot of good fairies who are dying, me, for instance. And, it's really important that we believe in fairies, that we believe in ourselves and believe in each other enough to do the work of healing, whether it be healing into life or healing into death. And as an AIDS hospice chaplain for a number of years, I helped a lot of people heal into their deaths. And that was all part of believing in fairies, believing in ourselves as gay men, and I was so honored in 2019 that the Smithsonian put my work in AIDS ministry, including my fairy wand, into the Smithsonian National Museum of American History in Washington. And just so honored that they did that. Oh my God, I'm in the Smithsonian.
You met Tammy Faye. You're in the Smithsonian.
How did that happen? Oh, and she's in the Smithsonian too. I put our interview on DVD. I put it in the box that the Smithsonian took for me of my work. Yeah,
amazing. Well, as someone who's been HIV positive for 20 years, I can tell you that probably one of the reasons I'm alive is because of you and like you, who really cleared the way and really fought for us. So thank you from one fairy to another. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. And thank you so much for talking with us today, Reverend Steve Pieters. You're amazing. You are an icon, whether you like it or not. You are. And
okay.
And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, Mathura.
Check out the DB Honeybutter Season 2 podcast at dbhoneybutter.com, Spotify, Apple, Google, Schmoogle, all the podcast places, or hit us up on Instagram or Facebook.